Welcome to the Exponential Australia Church Leaders Podcast.
Well, hello and welcome to the very first Exponential Australia Church Leaders Podcast of the year. Welcome to 2023. We hope that you have had a wonderful Christmas break, and we are so glad that you are rejoining us, particularly as we launch a wide range of exciting events that are coming up for us this year. Particularly with our special guest who is joining us today. But I just wanted to quickly make mention of a couple of events that are coming up. Firstly, we are putting out an open invitation to join us and Dave Ferguson and many, many more in Orlando, Florida this year for the Exponential Global Conference. That is happening from the 6th to the 9th of March. And we would love you to think about joining us over in Florida. The second series of events that we are really excited to have Dave with us for in Australia are our March regional events, where we are going to be visiting Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane and rallying church leaders, church planters, denominational leaders to talk about the cause of church planting in our nation. And we would love you to join along with Dave, many, many other people, and you can find out more details of those events on our website. But as I've said, we are joined by a very special guest today. Dave Ferguson is the Exponential president. He is the leader of Community Christian Church in Chicago that has 8 campuses, as well as leading Newthing, which is a global church planting movement. And I don't know how he finds time for it, but also the author of several books. Dave, we are so pleased to be able to join us on our first podcast for the year.
Hey, Charlie, how you doing? It's great to be with you.
Yeah, great. Hey, Dave, just for those who may be joining for the first time, have just heard your name. Of course, you're a well-known leader in the US, but particularly for us Aussies who are on the other side of the world, sometimes we don't hear, all the amazing things that are happening in the US. Maybe you just give us a bit of a backdrop to who you are, some of your experiences in ministry and your leadership, and also your family as well, and just, who is Dave Ferguson?
Well, first, Dave is Charlie Burke's friend.
What a great encouragement for me.
There you go. And no, I mean, if I wear a few different hats, but I'll start with family though. My wife Sue and I, we've been married for 30 plus years now. We have 3 adult children. My daughter Amy, who lives, since I'm in Chicago, we just call it the city, lives in the city, and she's a social worker. My son Josh, who lives out near DC and works in the city government, and then my youngest son Caleb, who works at Calvin University in admissions there, and is also a coach and an assistant coach, and sees himself eventually being a head coach and is moving in that direction. Very, very great for each of them. It's a terrific bunch that I get to be a part of.
Awesome.
As far as vocationally, I do have a few hats. So I'm the lead pastor at Community Christian Church. My brother and I and some friends from college planted this church, and we're still here. Wow. And we now say it's one church with multiple expressions, 4 different expressions. We have our different locations, like you mentioned, but in addition to those locations, physically, we also have locations in some prisons across Chicagoland. And then thirdly, we also are doing microsites that are both locally and globally, and I don't know if I have time to talk about that, but that's kind of fun. Wow. And then lastly, we also have a pretty significant online presence, so we call it one church with multiple expressions. Secondly, we founded Newthing somewhere along the way when we planted our first church out in Colorado, and then the next one was in Southern California in the United States, and then we went to, I think it was Detroit, and then Boston, New York, and we were just kind of doing one at a time. Amazing. And we started then not just reproducing churches, but then started reproducing actually networks of churches, and that's when it really took off. And we're now in over 40 countries around the world, and that's just God's favor has been on that, and I'm grateful just to be a part of that team. It's an awesome team. And then lastly, about the same time we started Newthing, a friend of mine, Todd Wilson, and I co-founded Exponential, and I am serving right now as the CEO and kind of the visionary for that. And it's one of those things where God has been very, very kind. And I think we may even talk a little about some of the origin story there, but delighted to get to partner with people like you who are part of Exponential Australia. So, yeah, I mean, what the fun part is, like, don't tell anybody this, but somebody actually pays me to do this stuff.
How good. That's fantastic, Dave. Well, you are right. The next question that I wanted to ask you, particularly as Exponential is relatively young in Australia, I'm always fascinated by the origin story, whether it be a superhero, whether it be, a hero of some kind. I'm always fascinated by where something originated from. And so I'd love to just take it, just a couple of minutes for you to kind of bring us in on the story of Exponential, obviously based out of the US, and how that has then been able to catalyze and what we're doing here in Australia as well to network and connect and stimulate multiplication in Australia. I think for us to be able to do that well, we need to understand its origins. And so I'd love you just to kind of tell us some of that story before we jump into another focus today.
Sure. In some ways, some of it was birthed really out of a friendship. And so, and I hadn't really thought about it, so you just asked the question now that, what you'll discover, I think about Exponential is that you might think it's a conference, you might think it's a podcast, you might think it's some kind of thought leadership, but as you get closer to it, what you'll discover, it's really a community as a cause.
Yeah.
And so I think maybe some of that got birthed because I was friends with a guy named Todd Wilson. Todd still plays a role as strategic advisor. The Exponential is a huge, huge help. And there was a small church planning conference called the National New Church Conference. Have I ever told you this before?
Oh, you haven't.
Have I told you this?
No.
Okay, so actually, yeah. So there was a small church planning conference, a National New Church Conference, that was primarily like independent Christian churches, and it had been around for like 25 years. And there'd be a couple hundred folks that would show up, and they had a good time. And they would encourage the other church to plant some churches. And what would typically happen is a handful of people would stick around afterwards, like go to lunch and say, okay, who wants to be in charge next year? And it wasn't the kind of thing you wanted to be in charge of because it was kind of a responsibility, but everybody had to kind of take their turn. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And so this year, that particular year, like was probably 16 years ago, my friend Todd happened to be invited out to lunch. And he was an executive pastor at a church near DC, Washington, DC, again in the States. And I was in Chicago, and we become friends because our church had gone to multiple locations, and I was coaching him and helping his church go to multiple locations. So Todd goes to this lunch afterwards, and people are like, nah, I did it last year, I did it the year before. And Todd's like, I'll be in charge. Wow. I'll take it next year. Well, Todd's an executive pastor, and he understands how to organize things, administrate things, and he's a brilliant strategist, but he's not really an upfront guy at all. And so after he volunteered to take charge of it, he calls me up and he says, hey, I just volunteered. I'm going to be in charge of next year's National New Church Conference. If I run everything, would you be the upfront guy, kind of the face with it? I was like, sure. How hard would that be? This will be a blast. So we decided, okay, so we did it. And I would credit this to Todd primarily. It went from like 200 people to like next year we had like 600.
Wow.
And so it was kind of like off and running. And we had such a good time. And nobody particularly wanted to do it. We just said, oh, we'll do it again.
Wow.
And next year it jumped to more than 1,000 people in attendance. And at this point, nobody even asked. We just assumed. And so it was a little bit of a coup, maybe. I don't know. And then the next year we had 1,800 people. And before you know it, all of a sudden it was like there were 5,000 folks meeting in Orlando. We had it in Orlando. And then we said, well, you know what? We ought to try doing this on the West Coast. So for a while, we were doing one on the East Coast in Orlando, the United States, and then one on the West Coast in Southern California. And I remember for us, there was a particular point where we had a conversation. We were both on a plane, and it was kind of like you realize, like, okay, this thing's going to make it.
Wow.
And I remember us having a conversation. I said, Todd, the same critique that you could make about big churches, and we do this sometimes. I lead a large church that, okay, you got butts in the seats, you got bucks coming in, but what difference are you really making?
Yeah.
We began to have that conversation. Hey, we got, 5,000 people plus showing up. And even though we're not charging very much, we're more than breaking even now. What are we really trying to accomplish? And we knew all along, we were really focused on church planning, and it wasn't our primary job. Both of us, our primary roles were in churches, and we were doing this almost volunteer, maybe quarter time. And that was when we said, you know what, we need a clear mission that we're going after. And you've probably heard me tell this part of the story, but that's when we began to really take a look at the 5 different levels of churches. And we began to realize that only about 4% of all churches in the United States at that point in time were what we would call reproducing or multiplying, level 4, level 5.
Wow.
And we said, okay, well, we're going to go after 10%. We want to, and we actually had to call it the 10% mission. Since that time, in 2019, we did the study. We actually found that we moved the needle from 4% to 5% to 6%, and now 7% as of 2019.
Wow.
United States churches are reproducing. And so then we kind of changed it. We changed, okay, we're going to have the 16% mission, because think about the innovation curve and like Malcolm Gladwell's tipping point.
Good point. Yeah.
Okay. You know, once you get to 16%, that percentage can influence the whole. And so when we talk about Exponential being a community with a cause, that's our cause, the 16% mission. And one of the great, just kind of joys and fun part about that is, since that time, we've had leaders from Europe come to us and say, hey, could we do this in Europe? And we said, absolutely. And Oyvind Auckland and Jürgen Eisen, I know, Charlie, you know them. I mean, just terrific, brilliant leaders are spearheading that. And I was actually in Europe for 2 weeks for 4 of our 8 regionals. We had almost 4,000 people that were a part of those regionals, which was awesome. And then, of course, yourself and like Tim O'Neill. Tim came to us along with a handful of people, said, hey, could we do this in Australia? And kind of one of our informal mottos that was given to me and to Todd Wilson by our mentor, Bob Buford, is my fruit grows on other people's trees.
Come on. Wow.
My fruit grows on other people's trees. And so the relationship we have with Exponential Europe, and actually the relationship we have with you guys in Exponential Australia, I mean, you have complete autonomy. And we kind of, there's an MOU that we have between us, and we share everything back and forth. And what we hope will continue, and what we're trying to create, is really a global community with a cause. Now, what I think I got this right, because Exponential Australia, you guys began to do the homework. And what percentage of churches are reproducing in Australia?
Yeah, so we came to find prior to the pandemic that it was only at 2% of the Australian church was actively seeking to multiply in any way, shape, or form. And so our vision is very much the same as what you've been able to articulate, Dave. Is we're doing all that we can to see that number increase. That's our fierce commitment.
Yeah, and I think I've heard you even talk about, boy, if we can get it to 10%.
Yeah.
And so I love that we get to partner with you. And quite frankly, I mean, some people see that, oh, that's very unselfish. But the truth is, we in the United States have learned a lot from our friends in Europe that are doing it, and now also a lot from you all who are doing it in Australia. And I think that's all that what we call the great collaboration. That kind of collaboration is going to help all of us move the Jesus mission forward. Yeah. So that's a little bit of the kind of the origin story, and it's a blast to be a part of it.
Love it, Dave. I'm so encouraged by that. And for me, just that heart to have multiplication at the very center of the church, like always considering how can we multiply ourselves in order to reach new people, to plant new churches, plant new movements. Yeah, that's such an encouragement to me. And I'm excited by all that the Lord's doing through you, through, Exponential globally. And yeah, so it's such a joy to hear from you today as you share that story. The kind of, I want to shift gears a little bit and kind of focus on another area as we kind of spend the remainder of our time together on this podcast. And that's particularly pertaining to one of the books that you've written. You wrote a book called Hero Maker, the 5 Essential Practices for Leaders to Multiply Leaders. And I think that so captures the essence both of who you are, of Exponential, of the great need, I think, in our time, particularly in Australia, to multiply leaders in order to reach new people, plant new churches, as I've just said. And I actually think that concept resonates really well with an Aussie audience. I think there's something in the heart of Australian, leaders that goes, oh, I'd love to make heroes of other leaders and actually begin to see that kind of self-perpetuating philosophy of ministry. And I think in this season, if we're going to plant new churches, we have to do that. We have to multiply on every level. And so I'd love just to spend the next chunk of time that we have together, you just kind of introducing us to that concept and maybe those kind of 5 essential practices. And I'd want to also at this time strongly encourage any of our listeners, make sure you go and get your hands on that book. I read the book earlier this year and was strongly challenged and encouraged. How am I thinking about multiplication at every level? And so, Dave, maybe you just guide us through that a bit.
Sure. Can I go back to something real quick? Because you piqued my curiosity, and because American culture, and I think you are onto something. But why do you think it speaks to Australian, this idea of hero making, of the idea of like not trying to be the hero versus a leadership style that makes heroes? Why do you think that speaks particularly to the Australian culture, or more strongly to the Australian culture?
Yeah, it's a good question, Dave. I think there's probably several things in that. With our kind of our wartime history, there's something about mateship in the Australian culture. There's something about actually coming alongside one another, being there for one another. In some of the battles that were fought, even in Kokoda, that was one of the prevailing characteristics of what the Australian military was known for. So I think there's a mateship component. I do think as well, and one of the negative aspects of our culture here in Australia would be around this idea of tall poppy syndrome. So if you put yourself up ahead of other people, sadly, which I think is a negative of Australian culture, people will tend to cut you down. But if you are making heroes of other people, then you can't really be accused of that kind of mentality. I think there's a sense in which if you are selfless to the point of wanting to actually see it, I love that line that you used before from Bob Buford, that I want to see my fruit grow on other people's trees. I think that's a very endearing, resonating thing that I think Australians kind of feel a deep connection with.
That totally makes sense. Which unfortunately Americans probably are not accused of. And honestly too, I think that sometimes I've even made the comment too that I think I feel sometimes more comfortable in a European or even Australian context than I do an American one.
Yeah.
Well, our point with hero making is that it's not necessarily specifically Australian or European or even American. I think this leadership style is very consistent with Jesus' leadership style.
Right.
I'll back up a little bit, and maybe I can tell you a little bit, again, kind of an origin story of where this got birthed out of. Exponential, we brought together some of the premier thought leaders around church planting and multiplication down in Atlanta for just a couple of days. And we wanted to take a look at what were the leadership characteristics, the leadership traits of those churches that are reproducing or multiplying. Yeah. And in our level 5 kind of vernacular, level 4, level 5 churches. And when we said the leadership style, we didn't just mean the senior level leader, like the senior pastor, but also like who are the staff and what was unique to the small group or missional community leaders that led these reproducing and multiplying churches. We made this long list. We got out white sheets. We had a long list of probably 30 characteristics and traits, just brainstorming these. And these were, people you've met like Ralph Moore and other folks like that are prolific church planners and multiplication leaders and thought leaders too. And so it was awesome just to be in the room. And we had this long list, and I'll never forget the moment after we had this long list. It was a guy, it wasn't me. It was actually a guy named Dave Rhodes. And Dave kind of stepped back and he looked at that long list, and I can still hear him saying that. He said, what's different about this list? This list of traits and characteristics of these reproducing and multiplying church leaders. He said, it's like they aren't trying to be the heroes. And he said, it's like they're trying to make people around them the heroes. And then someone else kind of chimed in. He said, these leaders are hero makers. Wow. And it stuck in that moment. And what we did then really for the book is we kind of, even before the book, in that room, we took that list and we really kind of pared it down to much fewer. And then for the book, we said, we crossed out some, combined some, but then we said, okay, what are the 5 kind of essential practices? If you had to name the top 5 here, what would they be? And part of it was for the book, but part of it is also for the conference, because we do 5 sessions. We knew we could communicate, 5 kind of big ideas. Well, one of the things too, as we began to look at this, we also began to say, this seems completely consistent with Jesus' leadership style. And if you go, let's go to John 14:12. John 14:12. Jesus makes this statement where he says to the disciples, this ragtag group around him,
Yeah.
truly I tell you, whoever believes in me, he says, first of all, and imagine him talking to you, Charlie. He's like, hey, and Charlie, you've seen me do some things. You're going to do everything I've done.
Wow.
But then it's like Jesus takes it up a notch. He goes, no, in fact, you're going to do greater things.
Mm.
You're going to do greater things than even these. And I think in that moment, what Jesus was telling his 12 was, listen, you're going to train more people and reach more people than me. You're going to take the gospel to more people and more places than me. And you're going to be the ones that are going to catalyze a movement to end the world, not me.
Yeah. Wow.
In fact, like you're going to write the best-selling book, the Bible, not me.
That's great.
And I think it's like Jesus was going, you're going to be the heroes of this movement.
Wow.
And sometimes I get a little pushback. Oh, hold it, isn't Jesus our hero? And yes, he is. I mean, he stretched out his arms and died on the cross.
Yeah.
But if you go back to, and I think go back to his leadership style, I mean, for the most part, as long as Jesus was them, it never got much beyond Jerusalem.
Mm.
But he was like, no, I'm going to invest in you for 3 years, and you're going to catalyze a movement that, over the next 2,000 years is going to reach billions of people.
Mm.
And I think there's so much there. And as we begin to really kind of unpack these 5 practices, we begin to see Jesus all over it. And I'll give you an example. I think one of the people, like I mentioned, and then you kind of reiterated, Bob Buford. Bob was a guy who was a mentor of mine. He made a ton of money in the cable TV business industry. So he wasn't a pastor. Wrote a great book. It's been around for a long time now. He's actually since passed.
Okay.
But it was called Halftime. And the subtitle was From Success to Significance.
Wow.
And it was actually a point where his only son tragically died, that he had this kind of aha. And he talked about his move in his own life from trying to be successful to really being significant.
Mm.
And in some ways, you kind of renamed it from trying to be a hero to being a hero maker.
Yeah.
Because he went on, and then after that, he actually launched something called Leadership Network, which, I mean, influenced tens of thousands of church leaders.
Mm.
And he also launched something called Halftime, which influenced, again, thousands and thousands of business leaders. But one of his practices, and this is what a hero maker would do, he always had like a 3x5 card that either keep in his front pocket or in his wallet.
Mm.
And he'd have, I don't know, 10 or 12 names on it. And these are the people that he was both relationally and financially investing in.
Wow.
And he was very intentional about that. And I happen to be, one of those people on his list for a little while. And he would always say, yeah, my fruit grows on other people's trees. Another thing he'd always say, I love this too. He'd say, hey, we're the platform, we're not the show.
So good.
Platform. I know it's just, yeah. And I mean, the guy was worth millions and millions of dollars, been wildly successful, but to see that kind of humility and do everything he could to make other people successful was really, really inspiring.
Absolutely. So
that kind of gives you a framework of like a contemporary hero maker. Hopefully you can see kind of Jesus as a hero maker.
Yeah.
I don't know how we're doing on time, but I could give you real quick the kind of the 5 practices.
Yeah, I'd love, Dave, maybe just to whet people's appetite, because I mean, of course, what a challenge to try and condense an incredible book into such a short amount of time. But maybe just to whet people's appetite, maybe you could throw out some of the practices that may really pique people's curiosity to go, hey, I want to go away and sink my teeth into this.
All right, I'll tell you what. Let's see how quick we can put them out there. And here are the 5. The first one is what we call multiplication thinking, and this is like a shift. I have some people even point to a shift in how you think.
Yeah.
And what I challenge them with is in the same way like Jesus gave the disciples, Acts 1:8, Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, ends of the earth. He gave them this big dream that he knew they couldn't accomplish on their own.
Mm.
And he knew that they would have to invest in others, who would invest in others, who would invest in others, like multiple generations of disciple making and leadership making in order to make it happen.
Wow.
And I always tell leaders on this multiplication thinking, you need to have a dream, okay, that's so big it makes you dependent on God.
Mm.
And if you don't have a dream that makes you dependent on God, you really need to get a bigger dream.
Yeah, wow.
And I think the first practice that we saw in all these leaders was they thought in terms of multiplication. They thought they had a dream that was bigger than, they couldn't attract a crowd that large. They couldn't train that people. They were going to have to do it through other people.
Yeah.
The second practice was what we call permission giving. And I have people point to their eyes because you start to see the world differently. You shift how you see the world. And the same way, like Jesus, he said, come follow me, to this ragtag group. I mean, they never imagined that Jesus would see something in them that could possibly have anything to do with changing the world.
Yeah.
And so when you have this big dream through multiplication thinking, that's the first practice. The second practice of permission giving, you start to see all the people sitting in your pews or sitting in your chairs in your church differently. And with each of the practices, we give a tool.
It's great.
And so the tool that we give for permission giving is what we call I, C, and U.
Yeah, great.
We call this the 4 most important letters of the English alphabet. I, C, N, U. And my hunch is, Charlie, you probably wouldn't be doing what you're doing. I bet there's a story. I'll just ask you, think about this. You can, if you feel comfortable, you can name a name. I bet there's somebody along the way who saw something in you that you didn't see in yourself. Somebody who gave you a chance.
Yeah.
Probably before you deserved it, took a risk on you.
Totally.
And that gave you the courage to go like, oh, wow, because they saw something. Does the name come to mind?
Yeah, there's probably several, but a name like John or a name like Melinda, people who have kind of said, hey, called something out of me that I didn't know that was there prior to that moment.
So, and that's one of the practices of a hero maker.
Yeah.
Big dream, like multiplication thinking, permission giving. The third thing, and I'll move a little quicker, is what we call disciple multiplying. This is, if you only get to pick one, this is the one.
Yeah, well.
Go through the Gospels. Jesus spent, of all the activities in the Gospel, if you put all the activities there, he spent 73% of his time with just the 12, just the few.
Mm.
And then 27% of his time with the large group, the masses, feeding the 5,000, Sermon on the Mount. And I challenge leaders, what you need to do is you need to spend, like Jesus, 3/4 of your time with just a few.
Mm.
Invest in them, and then have them multiply what you've taught them. And then the fourth practice is what we call gift activating. So big dream, permission giving, disciple multiplying, and then gift activating. And this is where you spend time with the few, but what the mistake that a lot of us make is we think, oh, well, they're there just to be my assistant or to be my right-hand person or my associate forever. No. A hero maker, you want them to fully activate their gifts to become everything God meant for them to be. I mean, like Jesus, he spent 3 years with these guys. And at the end of it, he said, hey, I have all the authority. Now I'm giving it to you, and you guys go. He literally commissions them. And so we do the same thing, whether it's missional community leaders, small group leaders, leadership residents, potential church planners, we commission them and they go.
Mm.
And so then the last practice, so you had multiplication thinking, permission giving, disciple multiplying, gift activating. Then the last one is what we call kingdom building.
Wow.
And this is simply a change in how you count.
Yeah.
Instead of counting like a lot of us do, like, oh, I had this many students in my student ministry, or I had this many people show up in my missional community, or I have this many people showing up at church. No, you don't count how many people are coming to my thing. The way you keep track is you count how many people you're sending out to do God's thing.
So good.
And so you'd like, oh no, guess what? We had the opportunity to plant 5 churches. Even before we got on here, you were telling about a friend of yours you were really excited about, you met, who'd help plant 14 churches.
Mm.
And see, that's what I would call the practice of kingdom building.
Yeah.
You're not thinking about how much I can accumulate, but what can I send out?
Absolutely.
So that's a quick snapshot of the 5 practices, and we consistently found those. The leaders that were leading these reproducing, multiplying churches were doing those things over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And we also see it in Jesus.
Yeah, absolutely. And that would be, part of the reason, obviously, as our the Exponential president joining us as we gather in 2 months together in Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane. Also, as we extend the invitation to Aussies to join with you in Orlando, our prayer is that those things would become much more the way of the Australian church too, because we know that when those things take root and they catalyze, incredible things begin to happen. And so, Dave, thank you so much for sharing those things, being with us today. And just again, a reiteration of both. Make sure you grab a copy of that book, Hero Maker, incredible read. and also those events, jump on our website. We would love you to join Dave in person in those cities at the end of March. And we're so touched by your time with us today, Dave. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Charlie. And I'm really looking forward to being with you later on this year, and all the people who are listening. Can't wait.
Amazing. Thanks, Dave. Bless you heaps.
Thanks for listening. For more great resources, please head to our website at exponential.org.au.